John King USA, CNN, weeknights 7 Eastern.
Was Osama bin Laden merely a figurehead in these last recent years as he was on the run, or is he more involved than many people thought in planning active terror plots? Let's get some perspective from CNN terrorism analyst Paul Cruikshank and CNN national security contributor Fran Townsend, who was President Bush's Homeland Security advisor. Fran, to you first. You were in the Bush White House when in the past, some of these al-Qaeda plans were found. When you heard about this warning, sketches at least, of a potential to attack U.S. rail lines on the anniversary of 9/11. What does it tell you?
Well, John, as you remember, New York faced this Zazi Najibullah case, which was a plot to blow up backpacks on the New York City subway, and in recent years. And so this is an issue which is very close to New Yorkers and puts people really on edge. So in talking to sources in the counterterrorism community, I was told that, look, they expect they're going to see lots of this. And people need to understand, as they triage, as Gene rightly says, they're going to put these out to state and local law enforcement so the people on the ground out in communities understand what we're finding. They emphasize they didn't see this as an imminent threat, and for that reason they had considered and decided against raising the National Terror Threat Alert System.
And Paul, again, this is one thing we know they have gleaned from what we assume are thousands and thousands of pages of documents, sketches. In the past, we know schematics of financial institutions have been found on these al-Qaeda treasure troves where they find the intelligence. What does it tell you that one of the first things they find is at least a sketch of a plan to attack U.S. rail lines?
Well, what I think it tells us is that Osama bin Laden was much more operationally involved in al-Qaeda after 9/11 than anybody really thought. He's got this information about really a low-level plot against the United States, putting some sort of obstruction on a railway line. So for the very bigger plots, he's likely to be even more involved in those sorts of plots. So bin Laden after 9/11, I think we're finding out now, was operationally involved to some significant degree with al-Qaeda, John.
And Fran, on that point, there's a big debate about the point Paul is just making. Was Osama bin Laden, because he was on the run, because maybe he wouldn't be active on the internet, because he was careful about meeting with people, perhaps was not as actively involved? But as we learn now that he may have been in that compound in Pakistan, one of his wives apparently saying 5 years or so, is that a clue that perhaps, as Paul just notes, he may have been a lot more active than people were believing when they thought he was running around in the caves up in the remote areas?
Absolutely, John. And so it will be interesting to see how much more of this sort of operational planning. And I don't want to make more of it than it is. I mean, people have said it wasn't much of a plan; it was an idea. But are there more of these in there? Now, what you're looking for is the reason Gene and myself, we both asked administration officials, did bin Laden approve it? It's one thing if there's a two-way communication where he's sent these sort of plans and then he's got to bless them. It's another thing if he's kind of a mail drop, right? Because it's too dangerous for him to communicate out. He's just receiving these things and doesn't really have a lot of opportunity to put his imprimatur on it, to make changes, to make operational suggestions. I think it's going to take some time for us to understand from the intelligence community as they go through these documents what role can we understand that he played. But Paul's quite right. The fact that there was even an early stage, low-level plan among these documents suggests a level of awareness on his part, certainly, greater than we expected.
And so, Paul, as we try to answer the question in more detail about how active, how involved, how specific bin Laden was, and also now that he is dead, and we know that, begs the question, if these plans, as sketchy as they might be, maybe others are detailed, if they exist, what do we know about the succession plan? Al-Zawahiri was the number 2. What else do we know about what happens next if they have outlines of plans to mount attacks?
Well, with the succession plan, according to the internal constitution of al-Qaeda, Zawahiri now takes over, and the Shura Council of al-Qaeda will rubber stamp that. And I think in the next month we'll see some sort of videotape from al-Qaeda saying that Zawahiri's the new leader. Interestingly, Zawahiri himself will then have to appoint a deputy commander of al-Qaeda, and there's a lot of debate about who that could be. And so Zawahiri is going to have to make a big decision. Is he going to appoint an Egyptian? And will the Saudis and Yemenis therefore be very frustrated with him because al-Qaeda becomes too much of an Egyptian organization? But if bin Laden was playing this greater operational role, then probably Zawahiri was also playing some sort of operational role as well. So I think we're going to find out a lot more about that as U.S. investigators go through this treasure trove of documents, John.
And Fran, another way to find out more about it would be to have access to the people who were in that compound who are now in Pakistani custody, including bin Laden's wife. What are we hearing about Pakistani willingness or unwillingness to let the United States interrogate those potential witnesses?
John, you know, I can tell you from prior interactions and cases that the United States worked with Pakistan. It's not unusual. The Pakistanis generally do not permit U.S. officials to have access for interrogation to people in their custody. We had that experience in prior cases, and my understanding, what you're hearing from sources is the U.S. isn't getting access to them. But I will tell you, John, that may not be in this instance so bad. Most of the people in that compound who were left behind were children. There were these several women who were there, one being his wife. But it's unlikely, given bin Laden's attitudes towards women, that he would have shared with her any operational detail, that they would know very much, that they would even know the names of people who might have come to the compound. They likely would have only known what they call nom de guerres, their war names, their aliases. But it's unlikely that these people could have given us very much insight.